When Jesus picked his disciples, he didn't actually pick the brightest and the smartest. He picked those who were unschooled and actually probably a little self-centered. Peter was a loudmouth. James and John wanted to rain down fire on a town. But those were the kind of men that God chose because he knew he could transform them from the inside out. And it would be these men who God would use to turn the world upside down, which is a great lesson for us today, knowing that God can use all of us no matter what we're like. Join us today as we continue in the Gospel of Luke. We're glad you're here, but we are going through the Gospel of Luke. It's taken us a year to get through 6 chapters, so we're going really slow. We're learning as we go along different things and the whole purpose of it is to see the life and words of Jesus and how that will change our lives, since that's what that's supposed to do. So I want to talk today and next week about what it means to be a follower or a disciple of Christ, because now Jesus is getting ready to call 12 men to be his closest associates. And I want to talk today about what that looks like and how that can apply to our life, because I think there's this false sense out there that says when I come to Jesus, or maybe I can't even come to Jesus until I get my life squared away. I need to know my Bible. I need to at least have read it once all the way through. I need to be really loving and compassionate, and I need to never doubt, and I need to never sin, and those are the things that I need to do before I can come to Christ. And so what we want to do today is dispel that and say that's absolutely not true. You don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to go to Bible college. You don't always have to trust God. I mean, at the beginning, it's like you're a baby is kind of what happens. And then you'll grow and it will move on from there. But I want to put that misconception to rest, because I think that we'll see that today, that from the men that Jesus chose, they were a complete blank slate. Like they really didn't know. They were fishermen. They were tax collectors. They weren't Bible scholars. There was nothing in them that would be that you and I would choose if we were going to choose 12 men to like change the world. So let's start in Luke 6, verse 12. It was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles: Simon, whom he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip, Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Now, John MacArthur wrote a book that I will quote a couple times in here. It should be in your handout. He wrote a book called 12 Ordinary Men. And if you really want to know more about these guys, it's a really good book. He goes in a lot of detail. But this is what he writes, and I like it. He says, John MacArthur wrote a book called 12 Ordinary Men. He starts it with these words: if you were going to recruit a team to alter the course of history, how would you begin? Jesus began with a walk by the lake. Follow me, the master told them, and they did. Thus began his uncommon mission with 12 most common individuals, men who would become Christ's very first disciples. Have you ever considered who Jesus didn't choose for his inner circle? He didn't select a rabbi. He didn't recruit scholars. He didn't look within the religious establishment to build his team. Any of these would have given him an inside track with those in power. Instead, he assembled a ragtag bunch of folks with unimpressive resumes. Jesus wasn't looking for religious superiority or extraordinary talent. Jesus wanted ordinary people, people with hopes and dreams of their own, but people who were willing to leave their lives behind to follow the Savior, people like you. So I love that. It's like he's taking people just like you and me, and he's going to put us on a mission to go out and tell people about him. Now, if you're new, we started in Luke, and we went through the whole thing, like the birth of Jesus, and then Jesus gets baptized, and then he starts going out and preaching and teaching and healing and casting out demons and all those things. But what happened is there's droves of people that are following him at this point. So it's not like these 12 are just the 12 disciples. There's a lot of people that have come to know him, that are following him, and that are sharing him with other people at this point. And so what we come across is a time where things are now going to change for Jesus. Now it's not going to be the thousands upon thousands of people. Now he's going to focus on 12, and these 12 are going to go out into the world and change the world for the better for all of us. Now, think about this. There's probably 2 years left of Jesus' life. 2 years. And then he's going to be crucified, and he has to leave his mission with these people who know nothing. And it's kind of shocking. I had one of my kids come to me the other day, and they said, "Mom, I'm really just struggling in my faith today." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Why is it like," and we've gone through this a million times, "why is it that why are we right and everyone else is wrong?" And so I start giving him a list. Well, Jesus, died on the cross, resurrected. No one else has done that. And then it dawned on me. I said, "You know what? Even better than that," I said, in 2 years, which is less time than it would take you or me to get a Bible degree going to school, in 2 years, God changed these men's lives to where we know 2,000 years later we have the gospel, we have everything we need to come to know Christ and be saved because of these 12 men who came with nothing, a blank slate. And to me, that says a lot about God, because if it were just some movement, if you think of all the really wacky religious movements, they just kind of peter out, and that's just the way it does. It's just that they don't last. But because it's God, he's going to make sure that it lasts, and it did, and he used these 12 men. And I kind of think that that is a big miracle, that they turned this world upside down. So I was thinking when John MacArthur said, if you were going to recruit a team to alter the course of history, how would you begin? Now, it would seem to me that a mission on this size, it would take Jesus putting out, I need your resume, it would be his first thing. I need to know how many times you have attended synagogue. Have you memorized the Torah? Because that's really important. You're going to need to know the Bible backwards and forwards. And so I think it's this huge undertaking and yet Jesus didn't do any of those things. And that's what is so shocking. I was thinking about Jesus taking time out of his schedule before he does this. He does the one thing that's the most important, that is going to be pray. And I think it's a great reminder that when we make big decisions in our life, it's really important to spend that time and get alone and pray. And we learned this at our marriage class last night. We had I told you, a great speaker. And if you didn't see it, go online and watch that, because it's really good. But he was talking about when you have issues in your marriage, how important it is to really just pray, to take all those issues and just give them to God, just give them over to him. And I think sometimes we don't do that. And I was listening this week to Stephen Furtick. He's in Elevation Church back east. And it was so cool. He was talking about Peter walking on water. And he came up with something in Mark, and I went to look at it, and it actually does say this. There's a big crowd of people, and Jesus is preaching, and then he sends the disciples on, okay? So Jesus goes up on the mountain to pray, and then he sees the disciples rowing, and it's exhausting, and there's a storm, and so Jesus is walking on water to get to them, but the Bible says that his intention was to walk on, or to walk by them. And you're thinking, why would Jesus walk by them in this big storm? But then it says that the disciples cried out to him, and then he turned around, stopped, and helped them. And sometimes I think, and I know for me, I tend to just know God is in control. So I don't spend a lot of time crying out to him for things. But I think it's a reminder that if you have a really serious problem or issue or a bad marriage or something, you need to spend that time crying out to him. Because sometimes I think it takes us crying out for him to stop and say, okay, now you're ready to listen to me if you're crying out to me. So I just thought about that. Anyway, so if you're going to make big decisions, where you're going to go to school, who you're going to marry, we need to handle it just like Jesus did, which means we have to take the time to spend in prayer and say, God, what do you want me to do? Because that's a big part of being a disciple, not what I want to do, what do you want to do? I just got a text from someone yesterday, and she's got a lot of really bad stuff happening in her life. And she said, I'm just this is what I want. And every time I pray and God doesn't give it to me, he just slams me. And I wrote her back, and it made me really sad because I thought, your best bet is to surrender. Like, surrender everything, whatever you want, surrender that to him. And let him do what he needs to do in your life. And instead of saying, this is what I want, God, and if you don't give it to me, I'm going to be angry with you. We've got to turn that around and say, God, I want what you want. And I was wondering if Jesus had like 24 people that he was looking at. He's like, I like Bob, and I like Carl, but God, who do you want? And then by the time, he's probably thinking, Peter, are you joking? Like, Peter's kind of a loudmouth. I don't want him on my team. But he did what God called him to do. So I was thinking about Cheyenne the other day. She liked this guy, and we told her, well, then we don't really think it's a great relationship, but we know she's in high school and whatever. And so we sat down and talked to her about it, and we said, if you want to get back together with them, that's fine. These are our concerns. And she said, I'm just going to pray about it. And I was really proud of her because I'm like, she's in high school. And I want, if we can just get to that point to say, this is a big decision. And I'm going to pray and see what God wants, not so much what I want. So that was just a reminder. Anyway, okay, disciples. He think about, there's thousands following him. He's going to pick 12. Now, the word disciple means learner or student. So basically, when you and I become a Christian, that's what we become, a learner and a student. And now it's our job to go out and learn and study and grow. I mean, it doesn't just stop with, Jesus, will you come in my heart? It doesn't stop there. Now it's this learning process that we go through. And I think that's a natural thing to happen. And some people don't think that. They're like, I asked Jesus in my heart, I'm going to heaven, and there's nothing that happens after. And that's not natural. I want you to know that. I know I've told you this 1,000,000 times, but it's the only thing I can think of. When God changed my life, I call it my Cabo moment, because I was in Cabo when it happened. But when I realized what God really wanted from me and what it meant to be a Christian, I could not get enough of reading books. I devoured Max Lucado books. Now you're going to learn about him. You're not going to be at a standstill. So we see this phase in the life of Peter. If you think about it, when we saw Peter, he's the first disciple that we're going to talk about. He saw Jesus, and remember, he invited Jesus to his house. They were at the synagogue together, so they hung out. And then at some point he decided, well, I'm going to believe in Jesus, and that's fine. But then there was a point when Jesus said, Peter, I want you to come and follow me. And there's going to be a change in Peter's life, because most of us, we go to jobs, we have our work, and we're a disciple, and we can be a disciple at our work. But there's some people that God calls and says, you're going to be an apostle. An apostle means sent out messenger. So there's kind of two different things. And the apostles and the messengers are going to be the ones that are maybe a missionary to Africa, or people that are sent out that go in full-time ministry. And that's what Jesus is asking of all of these men. Now, if I were Jesus, I would have gotten ahead of the game. I would have said, you know what? I just want someone who is naturally compassionate, naturally just loves everyone, because I only got 2 years to train them. So if they already have that, we're good to go. I would look for people who are naturally selfless. They just care about other people. Naturally trustworthy, like I can just trust them with anything. I would look for people who have been to seminary, Bible college, so that, I wouldn't have to train them because they already know. I would look for someone who knew how to pray. Like, they just know how to pray. The problem? Let's get on our knees and pray, because we trust God. I would look for someone who was a believer for a long time, because if you're a believer, you've gone through storms and you know how to trust God. I would look for someone like that. I would look for someone who's never fearful. Like, we don't need someone who's fearful on our team, because if you're fearful, then people aren't going to want to come to me if they're fearful, and so we don't want that. And then, of course, you want someone that has, integrity and character, because if I were Jesus, if I would have 2 years to teach them about heaven and hell and sin and repentance and baptism. There's a lot of stuff that Jesus has to teach these guys. And so I would get ahead of the game, but Jesus doesn't do that. And that's what I love about him, because he has 2 years to train these guys. And I was thinking about, think of the people that you and I know, and maybe it's even ourselves. We've been a Christian 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And these guys learned everything they needed to know. In 2 years, they were just rocking this world for Jesus. And we don't see that very much anymore. So if I were Jesus, I'd pick people who would have already had a foundation of belief to build on. But Jesus comes along and says, yep, that's just not how I do things in life. Look at 1 Corinthians 1:26. Paul says this, "For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. And the base things of the world and the despised God has chosen, the things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God." Because see, if he would have picked all the religious people of the day, they would have gone, yeah, I'm so smart, and God chose me because I'm just brilliant, because I'm a good studier. And he's like, I don't want people like that. I want to take people from A and make them B and say that I'm only B now because of the power of God. That's it. Has nothing to do with me. And I think it makes me realize that God's not looking for smart, intellectual, natural-born leaders with an A+ in like public speaking. He's not looking for that. He's looking for people who are weak and powerless to do anything. And then he can come into their lives and transform them by his Spirit, and then nobody can take credit for it except God. And that's God's way of doing things. So if you're here and you're like, yeah, I kind of feel like a nobody, you're like, yes, that's perfect. That's exactly what God's looking for. If you're like, I just don't have a Bible degree, perfect. You don't need one. I just kind of fear all the time. Great. You are God's specialty. So see, we have a skewed version of what God is looking for, when in fact, he's looking for normal, ordinary people just like you and me. Works really, really great. We watch a show called Numbers. I don't know, we found it on Netflix. It must have been, have you ever seen? Yeah, it's good. Anyway, it's an FBI agent and his brother's a mathematician, okay, brilliant. I can't even think of the word now. They say words I've never even heard of, okay, but his whole life is all about knowledge and how much more knowledgeable and solving math problems, and everything is knowledge. And one of them was about God, and he absolutely cannot believe in faith, in God, nothing, because in his mind, he has to have this rational answer for everything. And it made me sad, but it reminded me of this verse that says, to him, the Bible and Jesus seems foolish, but God says, I'm using foolish things to bring people to myself. So it's just completely opposite of what the world says. Okay, in Jesus' day, we had religious men, and remember how Jesus couldn't stand them because they used their religious upbringing thinking that was what God was after, but it's not. So I think the bottom line for Jesus is he's looking for people that are not dependent on themselves. Like, I can't be dependent on myself for anything. I think he's looking for people who are like sponges, who are like, God, I'm just blank slate here. I'm a sponge. You just pour everything into me, and I'm going to learn and grow, and then we're going to go out and change the world. That's what he's looking for. And I love people who were never raised in any religion. I think they're the lucky ones, because those of us that were raised in churches that had rules and regulations, and you have to do this and you have to do that, if someone comes to Christ and they're like, they open their Bible and they have no background. Oh, that was pretty. They have no background of what they can and can't do. No one told them to do this and that. Now they just have the Bible and the Spirit of God showing them what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And there's no guilt over things like, oh, my mom told me I should never go to a movie. Okay, my mom told me I should never eat pork or whatever. Oh, and they don't have that as new believers. So that's what I think Jesus is looking for, is people that just say, okay, God, here I am, blank slate, now use me. So John MacArthur says in his book, God's favorite instruments are nobodies, so that no man can boast before God. In other words, God chooses whom he chooses in order that he might receive the glory. He chooses weak instruments so that no one will attribute the power to human instruments rather than to God, who wields those instruments. Such a strategy is unacceptable to those whose whole pursuit in life is aimed towards the goal of human glory. So if you're here and you're like, I just want to be somebody, he's like, yeah, I can't really use you. But if you're saying, I just want to be who you want me to be, and you change me, then he's like, great, I can use you now. It's all about just being humble. So,
all right, hopefully that helped you see that no matter who we are or what we've done, that God can use us in mighty ways. Next week, we're going to continue talking about the men that Jesus chose, and he chose them specifically to go out and share the good news of salvation to those around them. But these were flawed men, as we're going to see over the next few weeks. Have a good week.